What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to the show today. It is Tuesday, September 19th, 2017. And I'm getting some echo coming back on this line. I don't know why that's going on. I got to tell you, ever since the new update to Skype, it has been really, really flaky and difficult to use. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room taking care of all of our tech issues and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, the big story right now, well, there's a lot of big stories, a lot of stuff going on here today. Just had a massive 7.1 earthquake, 76 miles outside Mexico City. Obviously, a lot of people were living closer to it. We're still getting videos out of the damage, and there are already deaths are reported, so it was a major, major one. And it came right on the anniversary of another major quake that hit Mexico in about the same area all the way back in 1985. And this is their second major quake in like less than 2 weeks. So things are really rocking and rolling on down there. Now, the other big story, obviously, is the UN General Assembly is meeting right now, and all the world leaders are up there taking their turns at the podium. And Donald Trump gave his presentation a little earlier in the day. And it was fiery rhetoric, and he laid out a couple of things. First of all, that the responsibility of any leader of any nation is that nation's best interests. Which makes a lot of sense, and I think everybody went along with that except the globalists here. And then he got kind of a little inflammatory and fiery, and he went after North Korea, and he went after Syria, and he went after Iran, and he went after socialism as a reason to intervene in Venezuela. And it just kind of, it's getting mixed reactions from all over. But one of the most important things was that Netanyahu is up there already doing what Netanyahu already does, pushing for war with Iran. And he had a meeting with Trump to push for war with Iran, saying that Iran's nuclear program constitutes an existential threat to Israel. Well, actually, it's Israel and the United States are an existential threat to pretty much everybody else here right now. And notice how Netanyahu is still out there saying Iran's nuclear program, even though Iran is fully in compliance with that P5+1 deal. And the IAEA has certified that. Of course, the Israeli media is out there saying, well, we told the IAEA where Iran has their secret nuclear weapons development sites, and the IAEA is ignoring us, so they're covering up for Iran because they're all a bunch of anti-Semites over there, blah, 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 blah. Well, following that meeting, even though Trump is very low-key about what his intentions are on the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran, Netanyahu came on out and said Trump has promised to fix the Iran deal. And I'm sure that Netanyahu would love for there to be a major war out there to distract everybody away from his impending indictment for corruption. But he's actually doing Israel a great deal of harm here because he's setting Israel up as the fall guy for a potential U.S.-Iran war. And no matter how they try to tamp it on down, I mean, for years after the Iraq War, people were saying that, yes, Israel pushed for that war in Iraq. They wanted to smash up the big Middle Eastern countries into little tiny Middle Eastern countries that Israel can push around. And so we're seeing a repeat of the same thing all over again, complete with the lies about weapons of mass destruction. Well, fool me once, Benjamin, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Now, France has already stepped forward to say that they're ruling out any changes to the P5+1 deal. They're saying it's France is demanding the full implementation of the deal and says any fresh negotiations are meaningless. Now, France is sending a very subtle message here, because when they're demanding the full implementation of the P5+1, Iran is already fully in compliance. It is the United States that has not implemented their part of the P5+1. They didn't lift all of the original sanctions, and they're throwing additional sanctions all over it, all over Iran, rather. And that, of course, is definitely not in the spirit of the P5+1. And they're making a big deal about Iran is building up its conventional missile forces, which was never part of the P5+1. Meanwhile, Iran is taking a much sterner tone. They've been very low-key for a while, but now basically in an interview with CNN, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani basically said Iran is ready for a swift riposte if Trump kills the nuclear deal. Basically saying that leaving the P5+1 is going to carry a high cost for the United States of America. And I do not believe Americans will be willing to pay such a high cost for something that is useless, which is basically what it is. Iran wasn't building nuclear weapons. They don't want to build nuclear weapons. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. It's not their nature. But Rouhani is pointing out, correctly, I might add, that if Trump pulls out of the P5+1 deal, it's basically going to decrease international trust placed in Washington. Now, that came as a real surprise to me. I didn't think anybody around this globe still trusted the U.S. government. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So, meanwhile, Trump, of course, after going after Iran, went over to North Korea and said, we have no choice but to destroy Rocket Man's North Korea. Well, after Trump's comments about Iran and Netanyahu, I think Kim Jong-un is justified in calling Trump the puppet man. So Trump is out there, didn't quite get to that fire and fury, but basically came on out and said that North Korea's weapons are a threat to the entire world. This from the president of the only nation to ever actually use nuclear weapons against the civilians of another country. And Trump is threatening North Korea. It will be totally destroyed if the USA is pushed too far. And further, he says that the U.S. is willing to go it alone if the United Nations fails to act. In other words, Trump got up there and said, yeah, we're a rogue nation. We're just going to do what we want to do. Meanwhile, they're trying to gather more and more support for the ouster of Bashar al-Assad. So you have United States, Britain, and the rest of the so-called coalition of the willing are basically saying that there will be no reconstruction of the country until there's a political transition away from Assad. So now they're trying to apply economic pressure to Syria, saying, yes, we came in and we blew up your country and it's a real mess there, and we'll come in and fix it for you as long as you change leaders over to somebody that we like. And a lot of this agenda is being pushed by what's called the Friends of Syria group, which is mostly these coalition governments and some of the Gulf Arab states, saying they're the friends of Syria and they want Assad gone. Well, it doesn't sound very friendly to me here. And Trump actually got a bit of a reaction when he started talking about Venezuela and socialism. And he made a comment, the problem with Venezuela isn't that socialism was poorly implemented, but that socialism was faithfully implemented. And Trump called socialism a discredited ideology, and much of the audience just gasped because many of the countries on earth are socialist. Some are doing a better job of it than others, such as many in the European Union. But again, Trump was out there trying to lay out a case why the U.S. is going to be the global hegemon and go on in and just smite the wicked that are on Israel's does not get a Rosh Hashanah card list. Now, turning over to the domestic policy, we're seeing a lot of discord within our government, a lot of faction fighting going on. And there was an article that came out of Zero Hedge about America's slow-motion military coup. And it's talking about how Trump has surrounded himself with all these generals who love wars, because it means money and promotion and everything, and they seem to be calling the shots. And that was never supposed to happen in the United States. The military was never supposed to be in control. It's supposed to be a civilian leadership, and we've lost that along with so much of the original United States of America. Another article that came on out from Zero Hedge, is the U.S. State Department waging open war on the White House? And it does seem like that because we're seeing the State Department, Nikki Haley and Rex Tillerson, very often at odds with statements coming from the Trump administration. Now, Tillerson was supposed to clean house at the Department of State, but apparently he's left a lot of the holdovers in place. and he hid the other half in powerful positions all over the building. Now, these are career staffers, and they're committed to preventing Trump from reversing what they've created. They like things the way they are. They see the current state of the world in U.S. foreign policy as their child, and they're going to protect it. Even former Ambassador John Bolton is out there saying Trump does not have control over the State Department. He needs to staff people that run with his foreign policy agenda. And for once in my life, I'm actually in agreement with Bolton. Donald Trump last January should have just cleaned house, scraped it out top to bottom, and brought in all new people from outside the Beltway. There's talent out here in America. It's not confined to inside the Beltway. In fact, if you go back and remember Deep Throat during the Watergate thing, saying the reality is these guys aren't very bright. They're in positions of power because they're willing to do the dirty work for the president. Trump made a huge mistake keeping those Obama holdovers, made a huge mistake allowing Comey to stay on as head of the FBI, made a huge mistake in not cleaning out the State Department, knowing how badly it had been corrupted under Hillary Clinton. And speaking of Hillary Clinton, she is not going gently into that good night. She is now, according to an article that we're seeing over here in the Express in Great Britain, she's now going to return to politics. And her primary goal is to question Russia's involvement in the U.S. election. She's back on that one again. Russia tampered with the U.S. election. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Well, look at all the times the U.S. has tampered with other countries' elections. Well, that's okay because we're bringing them democracy and the American way of life, which if you look around right now, the American way isn't working out so well. And apparently on NPR's Fresh Air, Hillary Clinton said she will not rule out challenging the legitimacy of the 2016 presidential election, although she said she wasn't sure if there was a legal constitutional way to do that, and I'll save you the time of going through the document. No, there isn't. So if she is already saying there's no legal constitutional way for her to challenge last year's election, what is she planning to do? And I don't know if she really seriously is thinking coup d'etat, or if she's just incapable of accepting her loss, if she's just had a mental breakdown. But Hillary Clinton has blamed just about everything and everyone for her loss, except her own failings. And she needs to look at these questions here. Why is it that despite the entire establishment and media operation against Trump, did he still manage to win the election? And let's not forget all the massive election fraud that's now turning up in places like New Hampshire. The reality is people did not want Hillary Clinton to be the president, not because she was a woman, not because she's blonde, they just didn't like her. They didn't trust her. She doesn't come across as somebody who connects with people. And she's got a long record, together with her husband Bill Clinton, of some very, very shady dealings. Now, there is one iota of positive news. Trump has appointed a new U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and this young lady, Jessie Liu, has a reputation as an aggressive prosecutor. She actually tossed a Rothschild in prison for fraud. And if you want to talk about untouchables in our civilization, the Rothschilds are it. And she nailed one for fraud and put him in jail. And the good news here is, because she's the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, the Seth Rich case is now in her jurisdiction. So this is going to be a real litmus test of the deep state, if Jessie moves on Seth Rich or not. Now, Greg Jarrett is out there saying that Jeff Sessions should resign, but not before taking action against Clinton, Comey, and Rice. And Jarrett is saying that Jeff Sessions is unproductive and ineffectual, and we've certainly seen that. And again, his appointment of Robert Mueller knowing that there was a conflict of interest because of Mueller's relationship with James Comey. That was completely inappropriate. And I'm in agreement with Greg. Sessions should go. Are there no honorable, ethical, moral people in Washington, D.C. anymore? Maybe that's Trump's problem. He's trying to recruit from within the local community, and the local community, they're all part of that swamp. And I guess there's a lesson there for Donald Trump. If you're going to drain the swamp, you don't hire the alligators as staff. Now, the FBI has admitted that they did wiretap Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, before and after the election, and prosecutors in Robert Mueller's office are getting ready to indict him. And according to the headlines, this is connected again to the Russian election meddling probe. But apparently what's really at issue here are possible violations of tax laws and failure to abide by disclosure requirements. There was nothing found in the Manafort documents that actually support the idea of Russian meddling. But they're still pushing that idea. Now remember, James Clapper explicitly stated there were no taps on any of Trump's campaign workers. So he lied. James Clapper out and out lied. I guess truth has become such an endangered species. Truth is such a valuable commodity, the government is economizing it. It's certainly an endangered species. Now, they are back to pushing this Russian interference here, and it's amazing. We have these 3 U.S. lawmakers are trying to shut down Sputnik's new FM radio station in Washington, D.C., and they're out there screaming that the Sputnik's FM station influenced the recent presidential election. Horror of horrors. They broadcast on the air and they influenced the election. There's only one small problem. Sputnik's FM station only started broadcasting this summer, months after Trump won the 2016 election. But, of course, facts and logic and truth are not a hindrance to members of the United States Congress. I guess they used that amazing BBC time machine, you know, the one that allowed the BBC to report on the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 26 minutes before it actually happened. That one. I guess BBC has licensed it over to the U.S. Congress. They can now warp space and time to make their arguments here. Latest polls are showing the public is overwhelmingly in support of absolute freedom of speech. They are opposing efforts by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which isn't all that poor, Antifa, and George Soros to find ways to restrict freedom of speech. And other indications coming out of the poll is Republicans need to start keeping the campaign promises made during last year's campaign, or they're going to lose Trump's base next year. And it's already happening. You know, I'm disappointed in Donald Trump. So's the Lady Claire. The only way I would support Donald Trump in 2020 is if Hillary Clinton ran again. So, now turning over to the weather here, Hurricane Maria, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is it is now a Category 5 hurricane. It just slammed Puerto Rico. The good news is it is veering north and away from the continental United States. So people along that eastern seaboard can take a deep breath, sigh of relief, if you will. Still more storms forming over there in the eastern Atlantic, so I wouldn't put the emergency supplies away just yet. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and when we come on back, we've got a phone call to take. So we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. I'm just looking on the corporate media here about the earthquake damage from in Mexico, and 7.1, it's a far-reaching field of damage. They're showing damage in Mexico City proper, and as you get closer to the epicenter, obviously it's going to be a lot worse. They're already reporting a few deaths. I think there are going to be a lot more before this is all over, so it's really just an awful disaster, and again, just such a short time after the other monster quake they had down there. We're going to go to the telephones here now. Alex in San Antonio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hi. Aloha, Mike. I was calling because I wanted to know, I know that you're very much opposed to the belief in chemtrails and all that.
Yes.
And that's not really why I called. I called because I wanted to ask you if you were aware of the Texas Weather Modification Association, and if you had been aware that there had been a law established in Texas for this association to work on the modification of weather here in Texas. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because the law has been in since 1967, and, you know, I created a tornado in a little glass when I was in second grade.
Yeah, we've all done that experiment, yes.
Clouds. Right, and artists
except for one thing. Except for one thing, it's not really a real tornado. It's a vortex. It looks like a tornado, but it's
right. Well,
it's a simulation.
My point is that given all this time, research and development into these weaponization of rain, I'm not saying that it's impossible or that it hasn't happened. I'm thinking we're looking at it, and I mean, 32 years to the day.
Okay, Alex. Okay, what you're not appreciating is the scale between a little desktop experiment and the planet as a whole. And also, I think you told our screener that you wanted to talk about the earthquake. So
which is exactly where I'm going with. Which is where I'm going with it, because at this point, you know, you always tell us that the military is 20 to 50 years ahead of whatever we have out, and we're looking at these huge devastation. I mean, it's concentrated in this area of the world.
Alex, okay, simple little question, then we're going to let you go. If, in fact, the U.S. government has a secret weather machine, why are they creating all these...
I'm not saying the U.S. government did it.
Okay.
I'm not... It could be a private...
All right, we're going to let you go here. I mean, this must be Kook Tuesday. I mean, it's a simple... You know, I got emails on the same thing. My mailbox is flooded with all this garbage. If the U.S. military, I mean, he starts out saying, you know, you say the U.S. military is 20 years ahead, and then I say, okay, if the U.S. military is altering the weather, and he says, no, I don't mean them, I mean somebody else. He doesn't really have a concrete argument. He's just trying to make noise and use up our time. In fact, we're going to ban him. All right, getting on back to the real world, where a sane and sober and drug-free people are operating here. Apparently, getting back to Hurricane Maria, it slammed the Dominican Republic. Apparently, they had to rescue the prime minister. He was caught in the path there. But again, the good news for that storm is it is now veering north and probably to the northeast the way Jose did. So it's not at this time aimed at the continental United States of America. Now let's go on over to the war zones because there's a lot of stuff going on over there. The Syrian army is advancing on the eastern bank of the Euphrates. They're officially across on the other side. Now remember, the Euphrates actually goes through Deir ez-Zor. So they basically had to cross over to complete the liberation of the city there. And they're just making great guns here. Now, this raises the question, is the U.S. going to start bombing them? And we'll have more about that when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Hang on a second. Is Al still available?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, Al, I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going to take a phone call from Al here. And what's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. I listened to that guy talking. Obviously, you know, some of these people, they never took science, or they really never took mathematics in school, because, I mean, the sheer energy that would be involved in trying to alter, you know, like this planet's weather, or even create like a tornado, I mean, it's just massive. It'd be the amount of energy the whole United States would use in 1 year. It's just astronomical. I mean, one lightning strike is about, I think it's like 10,000 kilowatt hours.
Yes.
And, you know, how many times would lightning strike in a typical hurricane? You know, I mean, it's just unbelievable. How do these people, like...
Well, you need to understand. You need to understand. You need to understand. A lot of these people, they actually have a job, and that is to call into shows that are trying to talk seriously about politics and news and economics and everything. And they get on the air with this nonsense to try and make the show look kooky, so the corporate media can say, "Oh, well, you know, Rivero's he's off talking about weather modification and tornadoes, machines, and all the rest of that stuff." And so, again, a lot of this comes from government psyops. The process is called kookification. And it's a propaganda stunt where they try and get things onto blogs and trip people up with a lot of nonsense. But again, you're right. For anybody with any kind of a science background, they realize the absurdity of all this stuff. And it's kind of angering, I think, when you realize that our government is spending our tax dollars to gin up these bogus nonsense to dump on the independent media, like the Apollo moon landings were faked, or the chemtrail thing, or the tornado machine, or the earthquake machine, and all the rest of it. And they're spending our money to try and keep us all confused and uncoordinated. And I've read that Constitution. The government isn't really authorized to do that.
No. And you know that the Apollo landings, that's one of my favorites when I hear people say stupid stuff like that. I ask them, I always ask them one thing. How many people do you think were involved in just one of those landings? And they have no idea. Oh, I don't know, 2,000. I said, try close to 250,000 people from front to back. How do you cover something like that up with that many people? Someone would talk. You know, they and you see it in their eyes, you know, they just don't get it. Well, why haven't the United States been back? Well, they've been busy going around the world trying to
kill people,
trying to prop up their dollar ever since Nixon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should have gone back to the moon, or we should have maintained our lead in the space race. We've lost that now. China's taken over. Russia's taken over. But again, for the fake Apollo, we always talk about those laser-ranging retroreflectors that were left at all the landing sites. And when I worked at the Table Mountain Observatory, I participated in bouncing a laser off of one of those units. Mythbusters did an episode where they bounced a laser off the one of those retroreflectors. And serious amateur astronomers, I mean, with the state-of-the-art today and equipment that a serious amateur can get, you can do it right in your own backyard. And of course, they come back and they say, well, they sent a probe that just had the reflector in that, and they just keep on going. Then you remind them that all of the Apollo landing sites have now been imaged by satellites of other countries, not all of whom are friendly with us. And they all confirm that the remnants of the Apollo the LEM lower stage, where they used the little vehicles, and you can still see the footprints. Where they were all walking around.
It would have come out by now.
So
it would have come out by now. I mean, this stuff is just crazy. Anyway, thanks a lot. I hope to hear from Dustin. Thanks.
Yeah, I thank you very much. As a matter of fact,
I can't stop laughing.
He's next on the line here. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of email as well, just talking about what a whack job that guy was. But I mean, look
thanks a lot.
Thank you. Look how already the John F. Kennedy assassination cover-up has collapsed. How fast 9/11. That cover-up collapsed. Boston Marathon bombing, how fast that collapsed. There's no way that somebody could have faked the Apollo moon landings involving hundreds of thousands of people and not had it surface until now. And basically every piece of, and you'll pardon the expression, evidence that is put forward on this ridiculous claim falls apart very quickly when you look at it. All right. We're going to get off that topic here. And Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, just real quick on that other caller with the earthquakes. And I hate to break this to you, guy, but, we've been having earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes before we were even here.
Yes.
And the cavemen were here. So, I mean, move on with, let's move on from that junk. Well, hey, Mike, did you see any of the footage from the St. Louis shooting? The video footage?
No, not yet. It kind of got lost in all the other things I had to do here. But again, we did get a correction that the rifle that was seen on the video wasn't being planted in the car. It was just a rifle that the police officer carried on duty.
Yeah, I was like, holy smoke, that's a pretty AK-74 with a 60 or 75 round drum. Wow, that's some pretty serious firepower. You know. Hey, Mike, did you see the Georgia Tech shooting with the woman with the knife? And then, of course, they're all out in the street burning the police vehicles, and they're all cheering for it, and they don't realize they got to pay for it because that's a taxpayer-funded vehicle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But again, all of this is being fanned up, and the suddenness with which this whole racial thing has resurfaced, I think, dovetails with Hillary's announcement that she is considering finding some way to challenge the legitimacy of last year's election. And so she may literally be trying to start a civil war to get Trump out and herself into that White House. That's a very dangerous situation.
Oh, yeah. You know, Mike, like we talked about, the world is moving on with a new currency, and we're dealing with this because like we said before, we're in decline, and it's getting to the point where there's riots are happening more and more often. I mean, you can tell the violence going on now. I mean, there's just a hatred. I don't know where this is going to end. This country's seriously fractured, and like I said, the world's moving on, and they're doing business deals, and it's just what a mess, Mike. I just know where else to go with this.
But again, a lot of it looks orchestrated. Remember when that whole Charlottesville thing happened, and then we found out that the police were literally ordered to stand back and let it all happen, and that all of these warring protesters all showed up on the same buses together. And they were all buddy and friends on the buses, and it wasn't until they got on the street that they started doing what they were doing. It's all theater.
Yeah, Mike, and real quick on Syria, yeah, I still think Turkey's not going to allow the Kurds to be set up. I believe Turkey's in Iraq and part of Syria. So I just don't think Turkey is going to allow.
No, they've made that very clear. They've made that very clear. They've got all kinds of military along their border. Iraq is saying that they view the future Kurdistan as another Israel, which is kind of hard to avoid because if you look at all of those Kurdish rallies for the upcoming referendum, you see a lot of flags of Israel being waved back and forth.
Hey, Mike, isn't it amazing how Turkey's got now the best air defense system in the world? You know, obviously minus some gadgets that the Russians keep for themselves, obviously for export and import. But they have like the F-16s they're using to bomb the Kurds with. So they got NATO/U.S. equipment on part of their, and then they got the S-400 from Russia. So they got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, they do. They really do. Okay.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. I'm getting a lot of emails. And I like this one the best so far about the guy with the weather modification. The sheer energy involved to transform the Earth's weather would require that scientists would hook up every mother-in-law on this planet and inform them that their grandchildren are not, in fact, too bright. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm going to give you a little critical voice here. I think you would have been a lot better off if you would have let Alex ask his question and you give these reasons that you just gave the last two callers. I think you'd have a lot more credibility doing that.
Well, unfortunately, every time I tried to talk, Alex would try and talk right over me again. And he just wanted to get this stuff out there on the show to make the show look bad. And again, when he came on out and he said, that you yourself say that the U.S. military is 20 years ahead of everybody. And at that point I said, okay, well, my question at that point was going to be, if the U.S. military has the ability to control the weather, why are they directing all these monster storms to hit the United States of America? But I never got that question out because he came in and said, no, it could be a third party. And so that's not a dialogue. That's proselytization. And again, I don't want this show to go off into la-la land about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and the Hollow Earth and all this other nonsense here. We're here to deal with the real world, politics, economics, science, health issues. And I'm very intolerant of people who try and junk the program up. So thank you for your concerns, and we're going to let you go here and get back to the news. So, as I teased before that last break, we now know the Syrian army has crossed the Euphrates River in Deir ez-Zor. They kind of have to. The river goes right through the center of Deir ez-Zor. And the river is sort of a natural border separating the Syrian government forces and their allies from the U.S.-backed rebels. And now, of course, the Syrian army is on the eastern side of the Euphrates, and they're going after those U.S.-backed forces. And that raises the question, will the U.S. go on in and just start bombing the Syrian army? Because very obviously from Nikki Haley's comments up at the United Nations, the U.S. has dropped this pretext that they're only in Syria to get rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda as part of the war on terror. And they're back to out there screaming, Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go. And I think the American people who have been following this issue all along are realizing that whatever reasons we are being given in the media have nothing to do with the real agenda behind the war, because they keep changing it all over. Oh, we have to get rid of Assad. He's a cruel tyrant. He's a dictator. Then he won his election. Oh, well, Assad is gassing his own people. Well, he gave up his gas weapons. Well, he kept some back. And he's, all right, we're not in Syria to get Assad. We're only in Syria to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda as part of the war on terror. And now we're back to Assad must go, Assad must go. And so when you look at that, you begin to realize that the war, whatever the real reasons are behind it, and a lot of it has to do with pipelines and right-of-ways and encirclement of Iran, we're just being, whatever they can think of today, that's the reason we have to be at war with whoever we're going to be at war with this time. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense is pointing out that the strongest attacks on the Syrian army are coming from where U.S. forces are stationed. Yes, there are U.S. forces deployed inside Syria, boots on the ground. Now, they're special forces, and supposedly, we were all told they were only there to lend medical assistance to those militants. But apparently, they're actually engaging in combat with the Syrian army. We basically have an undeclared war against Syria going on, and at some point, we're going to wind up going head-to-head with the Russians. And that's going to be a really, really bad day. I know there's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who want war with Russia and China. More about that later on in the show. But I don't think we can prevail. Even if it does go nuclear, I don't think the United States is going to win this one. In every world war, somebody's got to lose. I think this time it's the turn of the United States. I don't want to have to go through that. I don't want our children to have to live with that. The Russian Ministry of Defense is also urging the U.S. coalition to stop impeding the fight against terrorism in Syria. And basically what they're reporting is that when the Syrian army is fighting terrorists in Deir ez-Zor, they've been subjected to strong counterattacks from the north, where the Syrian Democratic Forces and U.S. Special Forces are operating. So it's very clear what's really going on in Syria. The United States is not in there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or Daesh, or ISIL, whatever they're calling themselves this week. They're there to overthrow Assad. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda are U.S. proxies. That's why the Pentagon has been shipping them weapons. That's why Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were smuggling weapons to them. They're not really our enemies. We're told they're our enemies. And if we take that to heart, then you realize that when Hillary and Obama send weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, when the Pentagon sends weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're technically committing an act of treason, which is giving aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. We're told there's a war on terror. We're told that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are the enemy. And elements of our own government are giving them aid and comfort. That is the absolute definition of treason. And treason during wartime carries a death penalty. Now, up in Russia and Ukraine, things are stirring around a lot, but Ukraine is facing a little bit of a problem. And this may be one of the reasons why all of a sudden Washington, D.C. is talking about sending them offensive weapons. See, Ukraine started this whole dust-up with the eastern republics and Crimea with a vast fleet of these old used Soviet tanks. But because they are old, they are breaking down. They are wearing out. And Ukraine's tank reserves are literally running on out. They're running out of equipment. And what's really amazing is Ukraine at one time was a tank manufacturer. And they let that go. And with all the equipment coming in from the Soviet Union, it became a storehouse for obsolete equipment. And now they're running out of that. Now, apparently, Russia put forward a draft resolution on deploying a UN contingency in Donbass to ensure the security of the OSCE mission. And Kiev and the U.S. are refusing to work on this, which indicates that their real plans are to create sort of a replay of Croatia and fan up the war. They don't want peace over there. They want war. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting the United Nations over into Ukraine and some peacekeepers might be a really good idea. Apparently, the NATO forces aren't creating a good public image for them. And apparently, the Kiev military in the occupied territory of the LPR have beaten up several NATO servicemen who raped 2 underage resident civilians in the village of Teplo. So, it's really ugly. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Nathan in Northern California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Thank you very much for taking my call. I'll make this real quick so you can get on with your show. But last week we had an anniversary of 9/11.
Yes.
And on Building 7, there's a really great video on YouTube, and you can get there. It's pretty easy to find. It says new, never before seen footage of 9/11 will give you chills. And this video has 4.4 million views. And basically at the 9.5-minute mark, there's this kid walking around New York City, after the buildings have come down. And he's got a video camera, and he walks up to a police officer, and he asks him about the buildings, and he said, the cop tells him, it's a pile of rubble. And then the cop tells him that the one across the street is going to come down. He said, it's smaller, but whatever. But he's telling this kid before Building 7, came down.
There were a lot of people who said the police were saying the building is going to come down, the building is going to come down, and there was no way for anybody to legitimately know that because no steel frame building had ever collapsed from fire before or since 9/11. And so obviously, again, Rudy Giuliani said that they were told to evacuate the emergency command post in Building 7 because it was going to collapse. And then later on when he was challenged, he said, no, nobody warned us. Nobody gave us a warning. And yet it's caught on videotape. So, we all know 9/11 was a staged incident, just like the Boston Marathon bombing and Sandy Hook and all the rest of it. It's an endless series of false flags. And we need to keep those things in the mind of the public because obviously as the war agenda moves forward, they're having to deal with the fact that the American people are pretty much sick and tired of war. So the question is how to motivate us, how to get us angry, how to ignite a new war fever in all of us, and that means having another false flag, a really big one, to get us to hate, whoever it is we're supposed to hate this week. I think they're planning these wars with one of those big wheels they have in the casinos. Go, okay, Russia, we're going to war against Russia.
Okay, very good. Well, one last thing, and I just wanted to make one quick comment on Donald Trump's UN speech.
All right, I'm going to have to hold you over the station break. Okay, don't hang up. I am going to come back to you. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'll make it real quick.
All right, we're going to do a station break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're talking with Nathan in Northern California about Trump and the United Nations, and you had something you wanted to add.
Oh, sure, Michael. And just one last thing before I get to Trump. I've been in the World Trade Center about a year after it opened. I was in Boston, and a friend of mine from California came out. He wanted to go to New York City and play dumb tourist, and I said, okay, let's go. So one of the first things he wanted to do when we got to New York City was to go to the top of the World Trade Center, and we did that. And when we got to the very top, the fog rolled in.
Yes.
And all of Manhattan was blanked out, and all we could see was the coastline of New Jersey. But my only comment on that, and then I'll get to Trump, was, the building isn't, it's big, as far as, square, but it's not that big, and there is no way I would ever want to be in either one of those buildings with a 757 or a 767, barreling in at 550 miles an hour loaded with jet fuel. There's no way I would want to be anywhere near those things.
I don't think anybody did. About those thousands and thousands of people, nobody wants to be in a building when a plane is crashing into it. Again, the buildings were designed to survive an impact by an aircraft because it had happened before in New York.
Right. Well, now we're hearing stories of, Jim Fetzer. He's saying that the thing, holograms and nuclear weapons, and another guy on YouTube is talking about directed energy weapons, and I'm just like, I don't have a problem with the original story where, a plane crashes into the building, punches a hole in it, and the jet fuel weakens the steel and the rest of it comes down. People can think what they want, but I'm kind of old school on that. Finding a passport on the sidewalk of one of the hijackers is where I get off the boat. That's ridiculous.
That was ridiculous. But again, let me insert here, okay? The people who are out there putting out videos about holograms and no real planes and directed energy weapons and micronukes and everything, they're part of that kookification squad, and their job is to make anybody that's questioning the official story look bad. And I'll give you a good example, the no plane at the Pentagon thing, because anytime the corporate media wants to attack the 9/11 truth movement, that's the very first thing they go to. Oh, those people don't even believe there was a real plane at the Pentagon. And the reality is that the serious 9/11 researchers all know there was a plane at the Pentagon. This idea of no plane at the Pentagon was just ginned up out of thin air in order to tarnish the truth movement and those who question the official story. And again, it's a poison the well tactic, kookification tactic, and it's a big part of the U.S. propaganda effort right now.
Yeah, well, Jim Fetzer has done a lot of good work in a lot of other areas, but to see him go off the rails on this hologram and all this other stuff, it just boggles my mind as to why he would even think that.
Well, I think Fetzer was also one of the people who insists the moon landings were fake.
That's correct, and I'm off the boat on that subject.
Okay.
I'm kind of in agreement with other people. But one last thing on Trump, and I'll get going. But I just saw part of his UN speech, and he's ragging on Syria. Excuse me, and he's ragging on Iran and saying all these horrible things, that Assad gassed his own people right at the UN, and how horrible Iran is for supporting Hezbollah, blah, 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 blah. And when you listen to it, if you take it seriously, it's almost enough to make you cry. What is wrong with this guy? It's absolutely disheartening. It is just so sad. He's starting to sound like President Obama,
or Bush.
Just a bunch of lies and nonsense, and it's enough. It's enough to make you sick. It's enough to make you cry. It's like, when are we going to get a president that tells us the truth?
When the dark when they open a new skating rink in the dark places.
Okay, I'll buy that. Anyway, Michael, thank you for taking my call. I hope you have a great show.
Thank you very much here, and we're going to switch over to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Paris. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
Yes. We're there. To let you know that the Barry Seal movie is out here.
Yes.
In France. And I've seen it 2 times. And is it not out in the States yet? Have you not seen it?
I have not seen it yet. I tend not to go out to the movie theaters for reasons that Claire can't handle those chairs. And so we just wait for it to come out on cable.
Okay. Well, it does implicate Bill Clinton.
Okay.
In that when Barry Seal is caught, and the Attorney General in Arkansas thinks, she's going to nail his hide to the wall, she gets a phone call from Bill Clinton. And so he just walks out of the courthouse, and the FBI and all the people that have dragged him in there stand there with their mouth hanging open. And so Bill Clinton is implicated, and at the end, Bush is implicated. There was somebody asking him, what he knows about the drugs, and he just sort of fades back. That's evidently a famous scene. And so knowing what I think I know, that the CIA and the FBI in Washington, they normally, don't they, approve the scripts and censor out things that make them look bad?
Well, they try to, but I think, with Oliver Stone, when he did his film JFK, was kind of a watershed, and the success of the film basically encouraged some producers and directors to go on and say, yeah, I think there's a story here that needs to be told. The only time that Washington, D.C. has really tight control over a movie is if it requires the use of U.S. military assets, like aircraft carriers, or what's that series, The Last Ship, where they need to use U.S. bases and U.S. facilities. And the Pentagon actually does have a film liaison office that coordinates with all these scripts. But for somebody who goes on out and is making their own movie and they're not using any U.S. property, it's entirely possible for them to get a script through there. The control that the CIA and mostly the FBI used to have over the movies, it's starting to slip, and one of the reasons for that is that Hollywood just had an absolutely horrible box office summer, and summer's supposed to be one of the 2 big seasons when they make their money for the year. And they just had a horrible summer, and they're beginning to wake up and realize that just being politically correct and going with the government's propaganda is not bringing people into those theaters. It's not generating DVD sales, Blu-ray sales, and so they're starting to strain at the leash on that. And if what you're telling me, I certainly intend on seeing this Barry Seal movie at some point here, but if what you're telling me is accurate, I expect that this film may actually do very well. Certainly couldn't be as bad as Mother. That one is just absolutely in a free fall.
Well, I was surprised. I just don't see how this kind of thing can come out, and people people aren't going to notice. That it was just one small scene, but maybe it's because I know the story so well, listening to you, that I thought, oh my God, they told it. They told the truth. Oh my God, and then they implicated the senior Bush at the end, and I kind of thought, well, why would they permit that? It was like saying, nah, look what we can do, and you can't do anything about it.
Well, there's another possibility, and that is that the version that's been released in Europe has those scenes in it, but the version that will be released here in the United States, those will be cut out. Wouldn't be the first time that there's, different versions of movies for different areas of the world. In fact, there used to be a running gag in Hollywood when somebody would do a scene, they'd say, now we have to shoot the European version, take off your clothes. And there's a lot of times where they'll shoot several versions of scenes in order to edit them, and they'll even shoot additional scenes to be added in when the film goes into TV release, because it gives people another reason to tune on in to see the scenes that weren't in the original theatrical release.
I thought of that too, that it could be censored there, not here, and
okay.
Yeah, I thought of that. Okay.
But I'm definitely going to be looking at the movie, and I'll keep an eye out for those scenes to see if they're in the American version or not. So, Kathleen, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to switch over to Steve in California. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I agree. I'm in agreement with the other caller from Northern California, my other brother, Patriot, out there, about the UN speech this morning. Trump is not his own man. It's quite obvious this man is not his own man. He's having the chain yanked on him, and I can only assume that was coming from Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. But I was deeply disturbed by that. But then I'm not surprised. I think every president we've had for the longest time has been controlled by Israel or the deep state, or a combination of both. But that's my only comment on that. But I did want to comment, because I sent you an email this morning about that RBN article on Michigan, the new law there that children can be taken away and talked to without the parental interference there, or like at least communication. Take your child behind closed doors and talk to your child at the doctor's office about whatever they want to talk about. And I did send that on to many, many people to say, if you give up your parental rights, this is just the beginning of the taking away of parental rights. And I hope people wise up and smarten up on this, because this is out of control, government taking over my child.
It really is. And I did post the article that you sent me, and basically the gist of it is this new law says that when you go to the doctors with your child, the doctor or nurse or some other practitioner has a legal right to take your child off into another room out of the parent's earshot and ask them whatever questions they want to ask about what's going on in the home. And who knows what they're going to ask? You know, are your parents violent? Do they have a gun? Blah, 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 blah. Children tend to be very truthful. Again, it is an erosion of parental rights, and they could come on back and say, well, your child is saying this, this, and this, and this, so we prescribe this, this, and this, and that, and you're not allowed to refuse. I mean, look at all the mandatory vaccination laws that we have. Even with the growing body of evidence that these vaccines are, A, not effective, and B, actually harmful, they're still being forced on us because they make money, and it's an exercise in government authority over our bodies. And it's kind of interesting when you look at all the pro-abortion activists where they're saying, it's my body, I get to make the choice, and yet when it comes to the questions of vaccines being injected into your body, they're strangely silent.
Yeah. You know, it's strange. All those years we were told that you should limit your fish consumption, 2 to 3 times a week, because of mercury ingestion. That would be a very bad thing. It's a carcinogen. But go ahead and use it as an adjuvant in a vaccine, and that's okay to inject it, but don't eat it. It's kind of amazing.
It is kind of amazing. And by the way, the mercury is not an adjuvant. It's a preservative.
Right. Okay.
Okay?
That's it, Mike. Hey, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are now open here. Interesting little article coming out of FortRuss.com. Project 2020. Preparation for war in Eastern Europe. And it starts out with an interesting quote. What is happening to America? It took on the functions of a hegemon and cannot cope with them. And I think that is an excellent description of what's going on. Or to put it a little more down to earth, they bit off more than they can chew. And they're struggling with it. And unfortunately, the phenomenon of American stupidity did not end with Jen Psaki. The recommendations of the experts at the Analytical Center, Atlantic Council, are sounding equally bizarre. But everybody is acting, everybody's talking like World War III is now a foregone conclusion. And there'll be a European component and there'll be a Pacific component, just like the last one. Now, as one of our earlier callers referenced, Turkey's Syria policy has changed now that Israel has waded into the Kurdish game. Israel is fully on board with Kurdish independence. Israelis of Kurdish ancestry are already flocking into the area, and that's why when you see these independence rallies in the cities of northern Iraq's Kurdistan region, you're seeing flags of Israel being waved around, and that's making everybody nervous. Because they've already got their hands full with one Israel, they don't need another one. And that's why Turkey is now taking a hard line. They have sent troops and armored forces to their border. You've got the government of Iraq saying they absolutely will not allow this to happen because they see it as a second Israel. And Israel would have been well advised to keep their involvement in this process hidden. But you know, Israel, they can't stop from boasting and bragging. It's like Netanyahu at the UN. Yes, I'm telling Trump to invade Iran. Trump has promised he will fix the P5+1 deal. We're getting this done. And now, just like as was the case with the war in Iraq, everybody's going to now see that Israel is behind this push for a war with Iran. And once again, the U.S. government is revealed as a puppet government, ruling the United States of America for the benefit of a foreign master. And that doesn't sit well with me. I don't think it sits well with you. We know that being under puppet rule doesn't sit well with anybody. Didn't sit well with the French under the Vichy government. Didn't sit well with the people of Yemen or Libya or Iraq or Afghanistan. Why should we be any more comfortable living under puppet rule? And every day that goes by, and again, Donald Trump's complete reversal. He campaigned on ending this globalist expansion. It was the biggest lie he told during the campaign. And we're rushing forward to this global conflagration, which I don't think the United States is going to do well in. And behind it all is Israel with its whip saying, go, go, kill, kill, war, war. Speaking of more war, U.S. bombing raids on Somalia have picked up since June, and admit it, you forgot we were at war in Somalia, didn't you? We're losing count of all of these things. All right, let's grab a phone call. Laura in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yesterday you had a telephone call from a lady who said she had a niece that had a child that died at Sandy Hook.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, I heard that telephone call before. I don't know if it was the same person. But the host of the one that I heard before started questioning, saying, oh, can I interview your niece? Could you tell me, did you go to the funeral? And the person started hemming and hawing.
Yeah.
Which led me to believe it was fake.
Yeah,
so I'm wondering if they got people calling.
Yeah, of course they do. Of course they do. It's big business. And, if you go to public relations firms' websites, they openly advertise services where they will have people that will call into radio shows or post to websites and blogs, whatever the client's message is. And it's called, technically, it's called grassroots lobbying, and there are no laws regulating it. They're allowed to pretend to be just ordinary people, and they're paid to basically make all these phone calls and go on in and try and derail the items under discussion. You know, like chemtrails and weather modification and earthquake machines, all that kind of garbage.
Yeah. Well, I just think that, they're trying to make people think, well, maybe Sandy Hook did happen. She had a niece who had a child that died.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm asking you is, if next time you get a call like that, if you ever do, try to question the person, try to put them in a corner, try to get information out of them. Say, hey, give me more information. Tell me about your niece,
Mm-hmm.
And may show them up. That's what I'm thinking.
All right. Well, Laura, thank you for
Definitely.
the advice here. We're going to have to let you go and take a commercial break, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right back to the telephones now. Ron in Missouri. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. Well, I have to plead ignorance when it comes to the United Nations meeting. I was wondering if you could educate me or enlighten me. Won't North Korea, Iran, and also the other countries be able to speak? And if they do, will it be not televised in the United States?
Generally, that's the way it will go. The American corporate media will televise, obviously, the President of the United States of America and the leaders of major nations that are allies to the United States, and the rest of the speeches will be ignored. I imagine when Iran gets up there, to go by past history, the Israeli delegation will just march out in protest, because that's just the way they like to behave.
Do you think they'll be able to pick it up on the internet somewhere?
I imagine there might be some sources. I'll have to look into that, because obviously I'm going to be very interested in what the North Korean delegation has to say, what the Iranians have to say.
Yes, so what? Yes. And will you please post it on your site?
I will look into that, yes.
I appreciate it, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take another phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You do, Mike. Mike, that woman before the guy just called you before the break, I think her name was Laura.
Yeah.
Something like that. She was talking about somebody who called in about Andy Hoax yesterday. I think she was referring to me. I just want to say, I believe 100% Wolfgang Halbig's story, okay? I've talked to him personally. He's like me. He's a former law enforcement officer. He's a lot more expertise in things like drills and stuff like that, especially school safety.
Well, he's a professional school safety expert. That's what he did after he stopped being a police officer. He's a professional school safety consultant.
Well, actually, he was a teacher and a principal for many years. He wasn't a police officer for that long, but he was a teacher and a principal. But he's very well-rounded, in other words. He's not an idiot by any means. And he didn't believe for a second that this was a false flag. He didn't even know basically what a false flag was until he started going into it, and he started having a problem he was having with authorities, not answering his questions, threatening him, actually having sheriff's deputies go over to his house and threaten him, his house in Florida, even though it was coming from Connecticut. He had he puts his phone number out there for the public to call him. He's a very gutsy guy. Matter of fact, my main thing now about this lawsuit is, like you said yesterday, that something doesn't happen to him before, you know?
Yes.
But believe me, nobody puts me up to saying something like that. I'm 100% believe that this was not only a false flag, it was a totally phony. I don't think Adam Lanza even existed. Neither is Wolfgang, by the way. We went over that reasons why. This whole thing, and as far as that other lady, I think I called you up for, that said her daughter had lost a girlfriend there or something like that.
Yeah.
Remember this too. They were using pictures of their grown or near-grown kids as little kids. Now, it's possible they also had some little kids there at the school that were part of the act, and then disappeared afterwards, went to other parts of the country. No matter what. These were crisis actors, and Wolfgang, and I'm not only Wolfgang. There's other thing about this too, that these people all moved into that place in Newtown, Connecticut, within almost the same time, within 2 years of when this supposedly happened.
Yes.
And there was a lot of money given out. There was a lot of mortgages
their mortgages were just paid off. Yeah.
I mean, I can go on and on. I mean, I don't even have enough time to go into all the stuff that I know about this, and I don't know anything near the amount that Wolfgang knows. So, and I just wish him the best. I've made contributions to his fund. I think I'm going to make another contribution. He's been threatened. He's been intimidated. He's been harassed. This man is an American hero.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Mark, I'm going to have to let you go. We're at another commercial break here, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this seems like a really good opportunity to make a correction on something we talked about yesterday. We had a caller called into the show. This is in regards to Sandy Hook, and was talking about how one of the children we were told was killed at Sandy Hook, Noah Posner, had appeared as a victim of a Taliban sometime later, and I mistakenly assumed that they were talking about two different pictures of individuals that looked the same, and I dug into this and discovered it's the exact same photo. It was presented first as part of the victims of Sandy Hook, and then later on victims of the Taliban. And it was really kind of a shock there. Now, maybe the media is just being very sloppy, or maybe they just have a stock of photos they put up every time they need a victim. But what really makes this story interesting is somebody put up a website pointing this out, that the photo that we were told was Noah Posner was also claimed to be this other victim of the Taliban sometime later over in Pakistan. And what makes it interesting is the guy who put up this website was contacted by Lenny Posner, the father, who's also the guy who's suing Wolfgang Halbig, and demanded that the photos be taken down, claiming that he's copyrighted all the photos of Noah Posner, and they may not be used without his permission. Now, it sounds to me like somebody got really, really scared that somebody made the connection that this same photo of a child was being used over and over and over again every time they need a victim. So that's going on right now. Meanwhile, I noticed during the commercial break, Fox News is now covering all of the Navy firings, all these admirals who've been let go over these collisions involving the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain. And I mention it because I want you to remember, back when these collisions first happened, and we got these flood of phone calls saying, no, this had to be an attack, this had to be hacking, this was the Russians hacking the GPS, this was this and this was that. Well, no, it wasn't. This was stupidity on the part of these Navy people, and the apparent conclusion of the United States Navy is they're not being trained well enough, and they're recommending changes, like apparently these warships were running without the automated ship information systems that are supposed to be running when you're in a crowded sea lane, which lets other ships know where you are automatically. And those are going to be on. Something else that was really, really weird. Apparently the Navy ships were standing 5-hour watches. And I learned the hard way many years ago when I was a rag setter that you can't have arbitrary length watches or you jet lag your crew to the point where they're not really able to function. What you want is a watch schedule that ties in with the 24-hour day. 8 on, 16 off, something like that. I'm not sure what the manpower load is on a ship. Or maybe 16 on and 8 off, but basically tied in with that schedule, where everybody's sleep cycle falls at the exact same time every single day. But that Navy schedule apparently had people just rotating around as if they were robots, where they could work for 5 hours and then go to sleep for 5 hours and, do their purge cycle or whatever. That's just not real world at all. So, anyway, that's what's going on over there. Israel and the U.S. opened the first American military base in Israel. It's a rather small contingent of Americans there to man an anti-missile system. But it does, again, show that Israel is kind of calling the shots for these things. Now, right now, there are these large stockpiles of pre-positioned munitions owned by the United States military that are in Israel. But Israel has been given permission. In the event of an emergency, they're allowed to help themselves. Now, as you know, it's Rosh Hashanah, and apparently President Reuven Rivlin, during his annual Rosh Hashanah toast, came on out and said Iran's global status is unacceptable. Story coming out of Ynet News. Demand to cancel Iran deal is an Israeli spin. This is all coming from Israel. And you have all these other countries like France. You have a lot of Trump's own advisors are saying the deal is fine. The deal is working. The IAEA says Iran is fully in compliance. The only reason to yank the deal or to pour more sanctions on Iran so that they back out of the deal is to move forward with the agenda for war. And remember, back in, I think it was 2005, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle that there was this long-term plan for wars across the Middle East ending with Iran in 2008. So that's still the agenda. Now, down in Yemen, along with all the other suffering that's going on, there's apparently this organization called Yemenite Children Affair. And apparently there are now accusations of disappearances of the children, unresolved. They don't know where they went. And the parents are starting to demand reparations if they can't get their child back. So are we looking at child trafficking for pedophiles? Are we looking at child trafficking for organ harvesting? When you get a country that's in that much trouble, all kinds of evil descend on them, along with the war itself. Now, the U.S. is getting ready to send another aircraft carrier battle group to Korea. At one point they had 3, don't seem to be there anymore, but they're going to send another one there to take part in the coming war games with North Korea and the U.S. and Japan. Now, we mentioned the other day that U.S. bombers were conducting practice drills on a South Korean military range that is close to North Korea to make sure that North Korea notices. And just to make sure they didn't miss it, apparently this time they had a formation of 14 bombers and fighters, and these were live fire tests. They were dropping live bombs, not nuclear, conventional, but enough to make a noise so that people in North Korea would take note. More saber rattling. And you need to understand that when the U.S. is carrying out these kinds of operations, it's not going to get North Korea to relax about their nuclear arsenal. It's only going to encourage them to move forward. Now, there's a story that came on out. This was in Sputnik News, and Sputnik is normally very good, but they're quoting a Japanese newspaper who is quoting an anonymous but informed source, familiar with North Korea. And so I have a question mark over this story. North Korea building their first nuclear submarine, and basically claiming that North Korea has been clandestinely building a nuclear submarine, which would be a giant leap forward from their current Navy, which are all diesel-electric submarines. And the story went on to claim that Chinese and Russian engineers are helping North Korea build this. And it was at that point the red flag went up, because I'd seen another story earlier today claiming that North Korea is really just a puppet for Russia and China, and that Russia and China are the ultimate problem. That if we're going to go to war in North Korea, it inevitably means we must go to war against Russia and China. So they're trying to tangle all 3 of them together, because we know the ultimate plan is to go after China and Russia to get rid of the yuan and the ruble as a threat to the U.S. dollar's hegemonic domination of the global economy, which, by the way, is a lot less hedgy than it used to be. Now, getting on into the economic news here, rather interesting article in Zero Hedge talking about Chapter 22. And there really isn't a Chapter 22, but it's an oblique reference to the fact on all these companies that are having to file for Chapter 11 multiple times. So the economy here is really bad. You can't say that this economy is good. Yes, the stock market soared to new unprecedented heights, and Donald Trump is unfortunately getting into the habit of using that stock market as a political banner. You know, it's soared this much since I was elected president. It doesn't reflect the real state of the U.S. economy. like the unemployment numbers, like the inflation numbers. It's being messed with. Speaking of bankruptcy, Toys R Us has filed for Chapter 11. This is the second largest U.S. retail bankruptcy in history. And it's rather sad to see yet another iconic store closing. And they're blaming sluggish mall traffic and losses to Amazon.com. And that's definitely an aspect. But the fact is, people just don't have money to spend. And toys are really kind of a luxury item. They're not really mandatory except for Christmas and birthdays. There's another area where I think Toys R Us may have misstepped. Because I remember when Toys R Us first came on out, and they had cool stuff. Erector sets, science toys, kits you could build a clock, things like that. Today you go into the Toys R Us and you wander around and it's nothing but branded merchandise from movies. And I understand that kids going into a store will see a recognizable character on a toy and say, that's the one I want. But along the way, the quality of the playthings sort of went away. It was basically a doll that looked like this character in a movie. And that was basically it. And I think that was a mistake. Yes, some of the branded merchandise, but they abandoned some of their other customers by pulling back on things like really good science toys. Yes, they have science toys. They're also branded from various TV shows. And unlike the science toys I knew as a kid, you're not allowed to exercise your own creativity. You follow some instructions in a book, and they don't explain why the stuff is doing what it's doing. I think Common Core got into the science toy business. So basically, at this point, the last word we had is that suppliers to Toys R Us are halting all shipments because they don't know they're going to get paid. So if you have young ones that you need to shop for the coming Christmas or Hanukkah season, you might want to do it now because inventory is at its peak point. And by the time they get around to the going out of business sales, there's really not going to be anything left that anybody's going to want anyway. Now, if you are a college graduate who is working as a short order cook, I have a little bit of news for you. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was founded by Elizabeth Warren prior to her career as a senator, has reached a settlement with National Collegiate Student Loan Trusts, which is the largest holder of student debt in the country. And the National Collegiate Student Loan Trusts are accused of wide-scale financial fraud, trying to collect on debts they did not own or that had expired. They were using deceptive or unfair means and flooding the country's courts with bogus lawsuits. Now, the trusts originally held more than $12 billion in debt. $5 billion has already been lost to default. The trust bondholders will not receive any payments while the audit is underway. People whose debts are found to be invalid will not owe anything and will not face the tax penalties for debt forgiveness. All wage garnishment and bank balance seizures will be suspended during the audit as well. Now, the settlement still waits judicial approval, but this is going to go a long way to easing the burden on those college graduates who got suckered into taking out these abusive, usurious student loans with these promises that graduation and a degree would mean high-paying jobs. They could pay those loans off in just a couple of weeks. And, of course, those high-paying jobs aren't there. They've all moved to other countries, or they're all being held by these H-1B visa workers who are willing to work for far less because they're not trying to service a college student loan. Now, as you know, Jean-Claude Juncker is trying to expand the Eurozone. And basically, in his State of the Union speech last week, said that those members of the EU that have not adopted the euro should immediately do so. Experts are saying this would be foolish because the single currency has been divisive. Now, on the assumption that there is going to be a new Kurdistan, Rosneft and the region's government have already entered into a gas pipeline deal. So they're being very optimistic. They're also sending a little bit of a message that U.S. support for an independent Kurdistan doesn't mean that the U.S. gets to come on in and make all the deals and get all the goodies here. Now, moving over to Europe and immigration issues, apparently, again in Germany, a 16-year-old girl was raped by 2 Afghan men near a refugee camp in Bavaria. There was a third one was trying to rape her, but passerby came to her aid and drove them off. This is what the open borders have brought to Europe, and the Europeans know it, and this is why they are so angry about it. Hungary is getting ready to launch another blitz against George Soros, basically saying that they're investigating the so-called Soros plan, which includes Europe accepting 1 million migrants per year and the demolition of Hungary's anti-migrant border fences. So Hungary is very angry over the way George Soros is playing God with the planet. And frankly, so am I. I haven't personally felt his wrath, but I just naturally resent somebody who has not been elected, a democratic leader of people, just having that much power and authority over them. Now, as the German election looms, there have been attacks on the Alternative for Germany party and its supporters. And we're talking real physical attacks. We're talking about people, hooded assailants carrying stones, in other words, brown shirt tactics. And they're being targeted for their staunch opposition to Merkel's immigration policy. So Merkel is adopting some of Hitler's methods. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. We're going to take a phone call here from Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. You were just talking about George Soros, and I just figured I'd take the opportunity to call in. And I heard a recent audio clip of him in an interview, and on the subject of George Soros. And basically, he was singing the praises of George Soros. He said he's really a good guy. You really knew him. And he means well, and he's really doing good things. And
are we talking about the same George Soros that helped the Nazis hunt down his fellow Jews?
George Soros, yeah, the one and only George Soros.
Oh, okay.
But that's part of my know who you are listening to campaign. Gordon Duff is this guy that runs this website and has a lot of guys under him. It's Veterans Today, I believe.
Yes.
And I find a lot of those people and a lot of the things that they say, and a lot of those guys are regular guests on a lot of alternative media out there, and they love to talk about aliens and all that kind of weird stuff. And they really don't offer any proof to back up a lot of what they say. And I think Fetzer was under, Veterans Today there for a while too, but there was some kind of dispute. I don't think he's any longer connected to them. But I mean, what does this say? Gordon Duff, I believe, is still a government contractor. He's a contractor with the U.S. government, and I believe he claims to be pretty wealthy himself. He's made a lot of money off working with the corrupt U.S. government and whatnot. But I just thought your listeners might find that interesting, because I'm sure some of them are probably very much aware and probably listen to Gordon Duff from time to time. I don't hear him as a guest on the Rents network anymore. He was a regular guest there for a while, but I think I'm pretty sure I don't hear him on there anymore. But yeah, he's out there singing the praises of George Soros. So I just figured I'd pass that along.
Well, I appreciate that. But
he also said he also said one time he was a disinfo agent, that he mixed in a lot of disinfo with the information that he put out.
Yeah,
some people,
I remember that.
Basically defended him on that matter and said that, well, he just does that for his own safety. But anyway, I just figured people would find that interesting. Also, that Posner story about the child in the two pictures where the child was killed twice. That story, I think, has been out for some time, because I've heard a lot of people talking about that over the past year.
Well, I'd heard about it too as well, but again, I hadn't paid that much attention to it. And when the caller called in, I mistakenly thought he was talking about there were two separate pictures of individuals who looked like they were the same person. But yeah, it's the exact same photo. It was being reused over and over again. And obviously, in at least one of the two cases, Sandy Hook or Pakistan, it's a fraud, which suggests that it could have been a fraud in both.
Well, if anybody takes those two photographs into their local FBI office and asks them what they're going to do about it, I wish they'd call in and describe the response from the FBI. They'll probably be escorted out of the building because
I would agree.
All these alphabet agencies are corrupt. They're all a bunch of criminals.
All right, Frank, I've got to let you go for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And latest from the Mexican earthquake, they're saying 44 confirmed dead, and I tragically expect that number to go much higher before they're done digging through all the debris here. Now, getting on back to immigration issues, here's kind of an interesting little story. The Los Angeles Times just ran a story saying that deported illegals are now overloading the Mexican government. Oh, what a terrible thing we're doing to Mexico's government. We're sending them back the people that had been born and lived there, and all of a sudden the government can't handle it. And they're out there saying that these recently deported illegals are overloading the school systems in Mexico. Funny how the Los Angeles Times never mentioned how all these illegals were overloading the school systems right here in the United States of America. So they're still on board with this whole idea about, oh, we can't send the illegals back. We need them to vote Democrat, and it just wouldn't be fair, blah, 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 blah. Nancy Pelosi was giving a speech about the deal that she has made with Trump for a quick amnesty and citizenship for at least 3.3 million illegals. But she was interrupted by these protesters who broke on in and said amnesty for everybody or nobody. And nationwide, the estimated population of illegal immigrants, nobody's really sure because it's not like they show up to sign a roster, is at least 11 million. And so now their attitude is all or nothing. Okay, I vote nothing. Raise your hands if you vote nothing. It's a lot of hands out there. It really is degenerating into just screaming back and forth. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Emmy Awards because the numbers are in. And no, normally I don't do entertainment news on this show. It's not a real big deal. But this one is notable. Sunday night was the Emmy Awards, and I totally missed them. I was over watching Oroville. And they had the all-time low numbers for total viewers and the demographics, all-time record low. And they're basically saying that the reason for that is really simple. The Emmy Awards were it was a Trump hate fest. Everybody who got up there, almost everybody who got up there was after Trump and bashing him left and right. And nobody wants to watch that. And what's really amazing are looking at all these actors who seem to feel that we are fascinated by their anti-Trump venom. And we're not. We're sick and tired of hearing about it. And so people basically just turned off, went over and they watched other programs. And by the way, Oroville is funny. If you haven't seen it yet, Seth Rogen put this together. It's a spoof on Star Trek. And in a lot of ways, also Galaxy Quest. It's a comedy. And it's got really good production values and really clever writing. They've had 2 episodes out now. I'm sorry, Seth MacFarlane. Seth MacFarlane. My mistake. Thank you for correcting me. Seth MacFarlane. But it's funny. It is definitely funny. Get that one into your DVR here. Over at Brown University, they're now going to offer segregated student dinners for their black and Muslim students, supposedly to promote racial reconciliation after the deadly clashes between white nationalists and counter-protesters in Charlottesville last month. Now, let me ask you a question. How do you reconcile by splitting people apart? You don't, really. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Bob, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael.
Yes.
These earthquake things that are going on, you know, they're talking about many small quakes like in Oklahoma where they're fracking and all the rest of that, and I think Pennsylvania.
They actually had one they had one on the New Madrid fault earlier today.
Yeah, they may be doing us a favor by pushing all that liquid down there, even if it's toxic, by relieving the stresses in those layers where you get many little quakes instead of one big one.
Well, you need to understand that there may not have been a potential for a big quake to begin with, because what fracking is doing is it's creating the cracks, little micro fault systems. And so the fracking can actually be creating the fault systems that eventually lead to the microquakes.
Yeah, the thing is, neither one of us knows, so I just put that in for my 2 cents. Thanks, eh?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I mean, that's the whole point of fracking, to fracture the rocks. What is a fault? It's a fracturing of the rocks. Thinking. Now, as you know, it's been a lot of years since the John F. Kennedy assassination. And JFK researchers have been frustrated by the fact that so many of the files from way back there in 1963 have been classified. And even Jim Garrison was saying during his trial of Clay Shaw is, why, if this is really what happened in Dallas, are all these materials going to be withheld for all these years? Well, in October, there's a whole bunch of files that are set to be released. I imagine they might have been laundered and sanitized over the intervening years. But in one case, something very interesting is happening. One of the files on Lee Harvey Oswald, the entire volume of CIA files on Oswald, has gone missing. And apparently, in this set of documents that are about to be released, as required by the Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, Volume 5 is just not there. And the CIA is hemming and hawing and saying, well, maybe Volume 5 was combined with Volume 4 or Volume 6. And their last announcement was, you know, we're starting to think there never was a Volume 5. Sure. Now, here's another piece of information that just surfaced. Police in Miami recorded a conversation on November 9th, 1963, between one of their informants and a man who laid out the exact events that were to take place in Dallas 2 weeks later. What did the Miami police do with the information? Well, they used it to step up protection for Kennedy, and then they passed it on to the FBI. What did the FBI do with it? The FBI passed it on to their offices all over the United States, with one exception. It was never sent to Dallas. Interesting. Now then, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Rather interesting story out of Activist Post. Apparently, the United States government has started suing citizens for requesting public records, violating the Freedom of Information Act. And the government is claiming it is in good faith to take away more of our rights, intimidate us, and delay Freedom of Information Act requests, thus challenging the notion of transparency and, in turn, the open government initiative. This is a government with lots of secrets to hide, and they're getting very, very nervous, indeed almost desperate, that the American people have awakened. And they're starting to say, we demand the truth about what happened, about Kennedy, about the Gulf of Tonkin, about 9/11, about the Boston Marathon bombing, about Sandy Hook. We demand the truth. We're sick of lies. Speaking of lies, it turns out that Equifax actually had a security breach last March 5 months before the date, it publicly disclosed that records had been exposed. 5 months. Story coming out of blogmalwarebytes.com. How to protect against identity theft. This in the Equifax aftermath. And people are wondering, what are they going to do? If you're one of the 143 million Americans whose data was accessed, what are you going to do about it? And, of course, everybody should always take precautions about securing their identity because it is a major, major problem. I had my identity stolen once. They sent it back when they saw how much it sucks to be me. Some of the credit card companies are talking about instituting a credit freeze, meaning you're still going to make your payments on the outstanding balance on your credit card, but you're not going to be allowed to put anything new on that credit card, just in case you're not really you. I think what all these credit card companies ought to be doing is immediately reissuing new credit cards with new numbers to all their existing companies and then disable customers rather, and then disable that old number. That's what they should be doing. But, you know, gosh darn, that's going to cost money. And we're coming up on needing to write the executives their end-of-the-year bonuses. And, you know, we're just going to have to make a hard choice here. Now, there's a new ransomware campaign, and it's rather dynamic. Apparently, the criminals can switch the malicious payload of emails between Loki and fake global ransomware on a whim. Now, at this point, you have to say cybercrime is out of control. It is a clear and present danger to the nation's economy, and the government can't do a thing about it because the cybercriminals are using the exploits mandated into our systems by the NSA and the CIA. Or the government just doesn't want to do anything about it because we're all forced to spend money on computer security software. Now, here's a bizarre story. This is out of the New York Times, so take it for what it's worth. And it's about Google and sex traffickers and a website called Backpage.com. Now, Backpage.com has a vile reputation of being where people go to advertise for various sexual practices, including human trafficking, including child sexual abuse. And obviously, authorities are trying to shut it down. And there's apparently a bipartisan bill that is intended to crack down on websites that promote sex trafficking. Oddly enough, Google is using its lobbying power in Washington to try and kill this bill. And everybody's scratching their head and saying why. Google doesn't take ads from Backpage. It doesn't donate money. But as Backpage fights off prosecutors and worries about the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, Google has emerged as its behind-the-scenes champion, and you have to wonder just why. What's going on over there? Why do they want this stuff to continue out there? Well, it makes a dandy excuse to call for censorship. And that gets us to a rather interesting insight coming from Investment Watch Blog. And it says we're being sold this image of hackers as dangerous, out of control, demons working for foreign nations to make us afraid of cybercrime. And you should be. It is out of control. And what this article is saying is the U.S. government has allowed the cybercrime to just get out of control to try and generate a public call that the government do something. And the government's idea of doing something will be to impose more controls on the Internet, including limitations of our ability to associate freely online. That this could be yet another attempt to impose government controls on the Internet. I remember all the way back in the time of the Exxon Amendment. And that was back in the early days of the Internet. The browsers and the World Wide Web still hadn't come online. Most social communication was done over a system called Usenet. And it was very popular. And then and Usenet was broken up into all sorts of subcategories. There were cooking groups and sewing groups and postage stamp groups and photography groups. Every interest was in there. Dance, music, what have you. Bluegrass. And then there was what was called the alt hierarchy, which is where more adult interests were categorized. And they had all kinds of interesting little Usenet news groups over there. And everybody was polite and minded their own business and stayed in the news groups they were interested in. And then all of a sudden, porn started pouring all over Usenet into groups where it was not expected or welcomed. And the people in those groups would tell the poster, this belongs over in the alt area. And they would get these very brusque replies saying, I have a First Amendment right to post this disgusting, tacky, pornographic picture here in the quilting group. And everybody was wondering what the heck was going on. And that's when Senator Exxon came up with his amendment to the telecommunications bill that authorized strict government control of online content. Fortunately, it was voted down. And as soon as the vote was over, that flow of porn onto Usenet stopped like a switch had been thrown. And experts were looking at these posts from the porn and found out most of them were coming through government and military net servers. So here we have a classic case of the government creating a crisis and then selling you the solution they want you to accept. And maybe that's what's going on with cybercrime right now. They're letting it get out of control. They're letting all your identities get stolen so that you'll demand the government do something. And the government solution will be complete, strict control of the Internet and its content. Another interesting little story. Apparently, Google is hiring 1,000 journalists all over the country. They're working with Report for America. And this seems to be a response to the growing view of both the independent media and even the corporate media that Google is getting a little too big for its britches. They're starting to talk about Google's overt censorship and liberal bias, even in the corporate media. And so Google is using some of its vast fortune to try and hire 1,000 journalists and plant them in newsrooms around the country to try and basically buy up the media and say, you will say only good things about Google. Not quite the sweet, wonderful company that was portrayed in that movie, The Interns. It's still a fun movie. Mozilla is planning a kill shot for the independent media in the next version of the Firefox browser. Non-approved news, meaning news that does not originate with the corporate media or government spokeslugs, will be blocked. Which means we're not going to be using Firefox any longer. Now, if you are the owner of an iPhone or an iPad, the official release date for iOS 11 is tomorrow. Now, Apple is saying for most people it's just going to be a simple matter of hitting that update button and just waiting for it to happen. But there are some caveats. Given the latest, most recent quality of software coming out of even Apple, especially Microsoft, you might want to hold off a few days so that if there are going to be problems, they happen to other people. You probably are going to want to use iTunes to back up your device. And the sad news is that a lot of 32-bit apps are not going to work under iOS 11. In fact, you probably noticed on some of the apps you have on your phone right now, when you touch them, you'll get the little pop-up that says, warning, this app is not ready for iOS 11. Contact the developer about getting an updated version, which can be frustrating when the developer of the app that you have used and loved for years is simply no longer around. I know, my attitude is if it's not broken, why are you fixing it? Why are you... Again, it's planned obsolescence. The business model is to force you to buy new whatever, including apps, every so many years. It makes money. And you can get away with that in a healthy economy, but this is not a healthy economy. All right, we're going to take a break here for commercials. When we come on back, more from the world of computers. So stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about computers. Now, if you have a Hewlett-Packard printer, you know those little ink cartridges are very expensive. And a lot of people try and if they're doing high volumes of printing, they try and use these third-party compatible ink cartridges. And if your HP printer is like mine, you will get a nag on your screen saying that Hewlett-Packard does not guarantee the results of using these third-party things, and then it will flash an ad. You can buy the authentic Hewlett-Packard ink cartridges from this place. Well, apparently Hewlett-Packard has released a new firmware for the OfficeJet printers, and these simply block third-party ink from functioning. You'll put in the ink cartridge, it's simply going to say no. And apparently they did a firmware release almost a year ago that blocked many of its printers from using non-HP cartridges. So the new firmware was released on September 13th, and they're locking you into that because that's where Hewlett-Packard makes their money. Those printers are sold at only a small markup. The real cash cow are those ink cartridges, because if you really think about how much they are, it's like $100 for a set of four. 4 little plastic boxes, you know, with a few drops of ink in them. And they're hideously expensive. Now, even worse, some Windows 10 users are experiencing what's called the black screen of death after the Windows 10 update, and Microsoft is saying it is in fact linked to this new Hewlett-Packard firmware update. And in order to get around it, you have to disable a service called App Readiness. But apparently, your computer will sit there for 5 to 10 minutes until something times out and you're allowed to get into your machine. Now then, as we mentioned yesterday, Arctic ice has actually increased 40% over the last 5 years. And so a lot of people are saying, well, where's this hockey stick we're supposed to be seeing? And that actually relates also to all these people screaming about how all of these hurricanes, all of a sudden, look at how many hurricanes we've got. This is proof of global warming and the hockey stick is here. No, it isn't. If you chart out the last 160 years of U.S. hurricane hits, yeah, we got a few more this year, but certainly not as many as we've gotten in the past in certain years. It's still a flat line. And again, major storms are not caused simply by heat. They're caused by a temperature differential. And you can have as a monster storm with upper atmosphere cooling as with heating the ground. Now, as long as we're talking about the hurricanes, many Florida residents have been without electricity for more than a week, and there is no end in sight just yet. And you're going to say, oh, those poor people. Well, thank goodness, some of those people, they've got solar panels. They can use them. Actually, no. Believe it or not, there's actually a law in Florida that makes it illegal to use your solar panels during outages. And you have to say, what the heck are you doing? But apparently this was something that Florida Power and Light's lobbyists agitated for and got. It's actually illegal to use your solar panels while Florida Power and Light repairs its infrastructure. Under these rules, Floridians with solar panels are literally being told you have to shut your solar panels down. You can't use them. What's the point of having solar panels if you can't use them when the power goes out? What brain dead logic is behind this idea? That's what I want to know. Because it is. It's brain dead. During power outages is when you most want to use those solar panels. We'll be back after these commercials. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. Bob in South Carolina. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Michael. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to answer your question about Florida Power and Light not allowing solar panels to be used. The reason is because solar panels are set up when you're not using the amount of electricity that's being produced out of it. It goes back into the system. It feeds back into the system. And if they've got live power going down the system when they're trying to repair lines, they get electrocuted.
Okay, that would actually make a little bit of sense, but then I think the solution to that would be to have some kind of a cutoff on the solar panel system.
Well, that's true, but you got to understand a lot of these solar systems are put in by companies, and the customers themselves don't have any idea how to deal with that kind of stuff. So rather than take any risk or anything like that, they just flat out say forget it, don't use it, or make it against the law to use it. So they're just doing it for their safety mostly.
Well, I understand the issues of safety, but it doesn't strike me as a really practical solution, to not allow them to use the solar panels when the utility power is not on. As I said, it kind of undermines the whole reason to have solar panels to begin with.
Well, if it was me and I had one of those systems, I would know what to do to kill the bad current that's going into the system, and I would probably violate the law. So they'd have to catch me, though,
Yeah, I imagine that would definitely be the case, but I'm sure those people working on those lines, they're going to have that little live wire detector, that little pencil-shaped thing, and also, I think anybody working with electricity is going to say, let's assume this line is live until we know for a fact that it is not. But I understand that concern of safety, but again, I think having a disconnect from the utility and have a big red switch and actually have printed instructions on there saying, in the event of a power outage, pull this switch this way. And then when the utility power comes back on, you put it on that way. Or even better, let's just have a sensor in the solar power system that senses the house current. And as long as the house current is on, there's a relay that closes that allows the backflow of electricity from the solar panels to the utility. And if the AC in the house goes dead, that relay opens and then it's isolated. That strikes me as the best possible solution.
Well, maybe they haven't really thought of that in the event of a hurricane yet, and something will probably come out of it from what's happened with this hurricane. So I'm sure somebody's thinking about that right now and probably doing something about it.
Well, I'm amazed that it wasn't designed into these solar power systems right from the beginning, because it took me all of 5 seconds to come up with that idea.
I know, it's pretty easy, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, well, listen.
All right, Michael, that's all I got. Thanks.
Right, thanks an awful lot there. We're going to let you go. Yeah, obvious engineering solution to make it all safe for everybody. What are we going to do? We'll pass a law. We'll fix it with a law. The law always fixes everything. Sure it does. Okay, now then. Over in Italy, Italian farmers are very unhappy over a European court ruling this week that allows growers to cultivate genetically modified corn in Italy. And some farmers are basically saying the majority of Italian farmers don't want these things. And they question the European Union interfering in the member states' internal national laws. And basically, there had been a law in Italy banning genetically modified crops, and this farmer, Giorgio Fedinato, was an Italian activist farmer, and he was growing GM corn on his land in violation of the law. So he took it to the EU court, and the EU court said, yeah, of course, you can grow GM corn. Now, the reason most farmers don't want the GM corn is it locks them into buying new seeds every year rather than saving seeds from the harvest, the heritage seeds. There's also the question about whether this stuff is really safe or not, along with the glyphosate in the pesticides that are paired with these GM corns. And again, if it was just confined to a field, or if it was an enclosed greenhouse area, that might be one thing. But when you have an open field of GM corn, that pollen is traveling to your neighbor, to their neighbor, to their neighbor, to their neighbor. It's carried on the wind, birds, insects. You cannot keep it confined to the field where it is used. That's just absolutely impossible. Now then, little study coming on out here. This is in Natural News. There's been another study of antidepressants, which along with confirming a greater risk of death by suicide, that apparently people on antidepressants are likely to die earlier than people not on antidepressants. And they're not exactly sure why, but apparently it can help bring on heart disease to be on these medications. But they make money, and that's why 1 out of every 4 Americans are on these. Now, you've probably seen lately that along with tearing down the Confederacy and everything else, football has now come under attack. Not just because of the insane cost of the stadiums borne by the taxpayers, but now they're talking about how football is unsafe for the brain from all the crashing and bashing together. And that is an issue. But it's rather ironic to see the same corporate media that's attacking football as unsafe for the brain saying nothing about brain-damaging mercury in the vaccines. It's like, it's okay here, not okay here. Another story out of Natural News. All 8 extreme childhood food allergies are also common ingredients in the CDC recommended vaccinations. One that we really know about, of course, is peanut oil is used as an adjuvant. Now, peanut oil is something you are supposed to eat and digest, not inject directly into your bloodstream. And because it's part of that vaccine antibody generating process, this appears to be the source for the explosion in peanut anaphylaxis, where some people, they just go into shock and die in the same room with peanuts. And that's why you see so many products that are labeled when you buy at the store. Warning, this product was processed on machinery that may have come into contact with peanuts. Nonsense stuff. Anyway, those 8 ingredients: peanuts, other nuts, wheat, soy, milk, eggs, fish, and shellfish. And it says if your doctor is telling you that your child's food allergies are hereditary, it's not accurate. And they've had a lot of people come on in with these children who are dealing with these allergies, and the doctor says it's hereditary, and the parents will say, we don't have this. But peanut oil was first used as carriers for influenza vaccines in the mid-1960s. And before that, anaphylactic shock syndrome from exposure to nuts was virtually non-existent. And today, it's a major, major problem. They're just in a rush to get these products out there on the market. And they're very reckless with it. Another story from Blacklisted News. Studies are linking heavy metals to disorders and declining IQs in children. They're calling it a silent pandemic of neurodevelopmental toxicity. It's disabling an entire generation of children around the world. This is coming from neurology experts Philippe Grandjean and Philippe Landegren in a 2014 report in Lancet Neurology. And they're just looking that this is an incredible tsunami of developmental disabilities affecting at least 1 out of every 6 children in the U.S. and millions more worldwide. 2 new studies suggest that the most common of these illnesses, autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and tics, are related to each other and share common causation of environmental toxins, particularly heavy metals. Remember the good old days when the government's job was at least in part to take care of you, to protect you from dangerous chemicals in the foods that you eat and the drugs that you take. And today it's the other way around. So they're all about protecting the profitability. Anybody who questions the efficacy or safety of vaccines is going to be demonized. How dare you? We're making money here. You can't get in the way of that. So, all right, going on back to the Mexican quake, and that is looking really, really ugly. They've stopped giving exact numbers. Earlier it was 2, then it was 44. Now they're just saying dozens. And there's going to be a lot more, and we still don't know. With a quake of that magnitude, there are probably going to be some significant aftershocks. Again, I still don't know that they've really gotten in to that little town that's right near where the epicenter is. Most of what we're getting is coming out of Mexico City itself. And again, it's kind of a dangerous situation because Mexico City is built on an old dried up lake. If you remember the original history of Mexico, it was originally an island in a lake, and they had these amazing canals. It was a really advanced civilization. But over time, as the city grew, they started filling in the canals and eventually the lake to have ground to build on. But that's still very loose lake bed soil, alluvial fill, if you will, underneath it. Now, when seismic waves travel through the earth, how they transmit is based on the material they're going through. If you are on bedrock, the quakes, seismic waves arrive as a high-frequency rattle. If you are on alluvial fill, whether it's Mexico City or any housing development built on a garbage landfill, the waves basically start a long, slow swaying, and that is far more damaging and dangerous. And so, unfortunately, in hindsight, should have been a little bit more thought put into the expansion of Mexico City. But again, a lot of this stuff wasn't really known until more recently. The kind of ground you are on determines how you are impacted by an earthquake. All right, let's see here. Apparently somebody went on out and decided to do a check of Bernie Sanders' claim that Americans are in a rush to adopt his single-payer system. And at this point, actually, the polls are showing no, they're not. And I don't think it has to do with the desirability or not of a single-payer system, so much as Americans have become very distrustful of anything proposed by any politician, even somebody like Bernie Sanders. And more people are like saying, let's just have the government shrink down and we'll go back to taking care of ourselves, because we did a much better job of it than the government is. Every time the government comes on in and says, you're not allowed to do this anymore, we'll do it for you, it's usually a poorer job than you would do for yourself. You're motivated to do a good job for yourself. You're motivated to make sure that your homes are safe and that your food is healthy. You've got a good reason to. It's your own life you're dealing with. When you have some government bureaucrat that's talking about health and safety, they're dealing with people they don't even know. It's an abstraction. And the more you centralize anything, whether it's electricity or water or natural gas supplies, the more it becomes a target for terrorism. Everyone's talking about terrorism, but nobody talks about the fact that the best way to avoid a terrorist attack on a power station is to have lots and lots of little tiny power stations rather than one big one. But it's more profitable to have the one big one. So, apparently, Snapchat, which is this very popular application, it's used by impressionable teenagers, is promoting Antifa and vigilante violence. So parents, you might want to take a closer look at just what your kids are being fed on their electronic devices, because online propaganda is the new growth industry here. Apparently, the United States Senate, which is still involved in this supposed collusion between Donald Trump and Russia, has decided to postpone their interview with Donald Trump's lawyer. Apparently, they're still not really able to find anything. They're digging like crazy. And meanwhile, of course, nobody's investigating the Uranium One deal. We still can't get anybody investigating Hillary's email server, despite a request from Congress to Attorney General Jeff Sessions. There's no special counsel appointed to that. Nobody's looking at the finances of the Clinton Foundation. It's just all get Trump, get Trump, get Trump, get Trump, and it's obvious to everybody. And as disappointed as I am with Donald Trump in terms of keeping his promise about no more wars, but then again, Obama made the same promise himself back in 2008, I think most people are beginning to see Donald Trump really as a sympathetic figure. Lied to by his own advisors, surrounded by people who do not like him, surrounded by even more people who view the current liberalized fascist United States of America as their lifetime accomplishment, and they don't want anybody to mess around with that. They don't want to have any change. They've created the perfect American society. Or at least they think they have. They haven't. Take a look around. All the violence that's out there, all the discord that's out there, the crumbling infrastructure. We're not a great nation anymore. But they think it's perfect because it's their work. I guess it's kind of like a mother who only sees beautiful and good in their spoiled brat child. Okay. Okay. We already talked about that one. I'm sorry. We're coming up here on a commercial break here. Here's a story: the Google apocalypse looms. And it's talking about people who are concerned that Google, with its tremendous wealth, is now starting to diversify into other areas, including meat substitutes, health care, and even childhood education. And now, of course, being its own media. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting a lot of updated information regarding this issue of solar panels down in Florida. And apparently part of the problem is that Florida law mandates residential solar systems to be connected to the power grid in order to take advantage of any unused electricity being generated going back into the system. And I've got another email here saying that, in point of fact, a disconnect switch is mandated. But in many cases, people do not have battery backup to store the energy. So most of the solar panels are underrated and won't power the entire house. They just use them to lower their electricity bill, and obviously there isn't going to be any surplus electricity to go back into the system. But apparently the disconnect switch, that is now a reality. And there are solar systems that are isolated. Florida uses solar power for signage and for parking meters, which it sounds interesting. I remember the good old days when you powered the parking meter. When you put the coin in and you turned the crank, you were winding a spring. But now it's all solar power. Apparently there's been a major drug seizure in New York. They seized enough fentanyl to kill 32 million people. That's a lot of fentanyl. They're saying it's the biggest ever heroin bust. And fentanyl, of course, is a synthetic form of heroin. But you need to be very careful with it. When it first came on out, I remember back in Los Angeles, there was a particular isomer of fentanyl. I think it was D-alpha fentanyl. Don't quote me on that one. Which heroin users were taking it, and it was giving them a permanent case of Parkinson's disease. Of course, you shouldn't be messing with that stuff anyway. And I'm not preaching. I'm not a saint. I had my wild youth as well. So, still in all. You know, it's kind of hard to push that idea that you should be very careful about street drugs when you realize just how bad the orthodox prescription drugs have become, how dangerous they've become. I remember, I think it was about a year ago, we were talking about a major scandal where some of the big chain pharmaceutical stores had medication that really wasn't up to the standards, didn't have enough didn't have as much of the real medicinal content as the labeling said. Had stuff in there that wasn't supposed to be there as a filler to make the capsules look full. It does feel like the whole world has kind of lost its way with all of this chasing after pieces of paper with colored ink all over it. And we need to sort of come on back and find our center and redecide what's really important to us as we spend our time on this planet Earth. And we do need to take a tougher stance, I think, with those who abuse their positions of power or commerce for greater wealth at the expense of the safety and health and well-being of ordinary people. And that seems to have gone away. We need to get that back. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard Show today. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. He's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.